The smell of burgers on the grill was thick, but the tension was thicker. I'd only asked my daughter-in-law, Chloe, a simple question about a job offer she'd mentioned. Her face tightened. "With all my medical bills and these crippling student loans, Eleanor," she snapped, her voice sharp enough for the other guests to hear, "you just don't understand the kind of pressure I'm under. We can't all have a house that's paid off." Her words hit me like a slap. She wasn't just dismissing me. She was insulting the life my late husband and I had worked so hard to build. That public disrespect was the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for months. To understand how we got there, you have to go back to the day my son came to me, asking to borrow the money I was saving for my roof. That barbecue was just the opening shot. The real battle began a few weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday, the day my son came to me asking to borrow the money I was saving for my roof. Mark didn't even take his coat off. He just stood in my entryway, dripping water onto the mat, looking like a hollowed-out version of himself. He was wearing his old high school faculty t-shirt, the one with the cracked history department logo. His hair was sticking up, and he had dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there at the barbecue. "Mom," he started, and his voice cracked. That was all it took for my heart to clench. "Mom, I'm in trouble." I led him to the kitchen table and poured him a cup of coffee he didn't touch. He just stared into the mug. "It's Chloe," he finally said. "Her student loans, the ones from her nursing degree, they're about to default. They're going to garnish her wages." "Garnish?" I said, sitting down across from him. "But isn't she working?" "I thought the hospital was." "She can't, Mom," he cut me off, and the desperation in his voice scared me. Her chronic fatigue, it's flared up again, worse than ever. The stress is making her physically sick. She hasn't been able to take a shift in 3 weeks, and with the medical bills on top of the loans. She's terrified. These debt collectors are calling all day. She just sits in the dark and cries. He was wringing his hands, a habit he hadn't had since he was a kid facing a bad report card. He was a good man, a high school history teacher who cared more about his students than his paycheck. He was a giver, like me, and I could see this woman, his wife, was draining him dry. "How much, Mark?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes were pleading. $8,000, just to get them to back off, just to stop the default. She said she'd pay it all back, Mom, as soon as she's well enough to work again. She's just so sick. $8,000. My gaze drifted from his face, past the kitchen, and into the living room. I looked right up at the ceiling, at the ugly, pale brown water stain in the corner. It was bigger than last week. After that last big storm, I'd started hearing it. A slow drip, 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 in the attic. The sound of my own security rotting away. Then, I looked over at the other side of the room, my sewing corner. For the past 2 years, ever since my husband David passed, that corner had been my sanctuary and my side hustle. My old machine, a stack of quilting books, and my shelves. Oh, the shelves. They were piled high with fabric, hundreds of bolts and fat quarters, organized by color. To anyone else, it was just a hobby. To me, it was my independence. I sold my quilts on Etsy. Baby blankets, queen-sized wedding gifts, intricate wall hangings. It was hours of work. My back would ache and my fingers would get raw. But every quilt I sold, every 5-star review, was mine. The money I made went into a special account. I called it the Roof Repair Fund. It had taken me 26 months to save almost $8,500. I remembered David, the day we closed on this house, patting the wall in the living room. He'd turned to me with that big, goofy grin. "This is it, Elle, our fortress. As long as we have this, we're safe." That fortress was leaking. And my son, my only child, was sitting at my table, crumbling. Chloe's words from the barbecue echoed in my head. "We can't all have a house that's paid off." The entitlement in her voice, the casual disrespect. She saw this house, my fortress, as just a bank she could withdraw from. But this was Mark, my son. He looked broken, and a mother's instinct to fix it, to keep the peace, is a powerful thing. It can make you do things that go against every bit of your own common sense. "Mark," I said, my voice quiet, "I have the money. For the roof." His head snapped up, his face flooded with a relief so intense it made me sick. "Mom, you'd do that? Are you sure?" I didn't answer. I just walked over to my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my bank account. I showed him the line item, Roof Repair Fund, $8,472. He watched as I clicked the transfer button and moved $8,000 into his checking account. He was beside me in an instant, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. "You're a lifesaver, Mom. A literal lifesaver. Chloe will be. She'll be so relieved." Thank you. It's just a small drip anyway," I lied, patting his back. "I can put a bucket under it for now. It's fine." He left 5 minutes later, a completely different man. He was walking tall. He was smiling. He was the hero swooping in to save his damsel in distress. I stayed at my desk. I looked at the remaining $472 in my roof account. Then I looked over at my sewing table, at the half-finished quilt top laid out on it. It was a pinwheel pattern, made of hundreds of tiny, colorful triangles. These little squares of fabric. I thought of the hours of cutting, of pressing, of sewing tiny, perfect seams. 2 years of my life, stitched together to protect my home. And I had just given it away in 30 seconds to stop a problem that deep in my gut I knew wasn't the whole story. I closed the laptop, and from the attic, I heard it. Drip, drip, drip. That drip, drip, drip became the soundtrack to my life for the next few weeks. It was the first thing I heard in the morning and the last thing I heard at night. I'd be at my sewing machine, trying to focus on a complex star pattern, and that sound from the attic would pull me right out of it. It was the sound of my own foolishness. Then came Thanksgiving. Mark called, sounding happier than I'd heard him in months. "Mom, Chloe's feeling so much better." The relief. "It's like a miracle. She wants to host Thanksgiving. Just small, just us and her mom. Please say you'll come. It would mean the world to her." I said yes, of course. My son sounded happy. That's all I wanted. I spent 2 days making my famous sweet potato casserole with the pecan crumble topping, the one David always said was better than his mom's. I put on my one good church blouse and drove over to their apartment, the heavy casserole dish warm in my lap. The peace I was feeling vanished the second Mark opened the door. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't just turkey, it was rosemary and expensive wine. The second thing was the noise. It wasn't just small. The apartment was full of people I didn't know, all dressed in crisp new clothes, holding delicate wine glasses. And the third thing, the thing that made my breath catch in my throat, was the television. It was massive. A flat screen that took up half the living room wall, so bright and clear it looked more like a window. It wasn't there a month ago. "Mom, you made it!" Mark hugged me, taking the casserole. "Come on in. Chloe's dying to see you." Chloe was holding court by the kitchen island, laughing, her face flushed and glowing. She didn't look sick. She looked radiant. She was wearing a deep green silk blouse I'd never seen before, and a delicate gold necklace at her throat. "Eleanor, happy Thanksgiving," she chirped, giving me a fast one-armed hug before turning back to her friends. "This is Mark's mom. She's the one who makes those amazing quilts." Her mother, a woman with the same sharp eyes as Chloe, was standing beside a gleaming new espresso machine. "You must be so proud of Mark," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "He's just so good to our Chloe. He knows she deserves nice things." I just nodded, my casserole feeling suddenly heavy and old-fashioned. I looked around the room as Mark introduced me to people whose names I immediately forgot. Friends of the family, Chloe called them. Important people. I saw the bottles of wine lined up on the counter. They weren't the $10 bottles from the grocery store. These had fancy French labels. The throw pillows on the sofa were new, a plush velvet that matched Chloe's blouse. And on the dining table, as the centerpiece, was a floral arrangement that made my stomach tighten. It was from Fleur, the most expensive, pretentious floral shop in the city. I knew because I had walked in there once, hoping to buy a small bouquet for David's grave. The prices had chased me right back out. This arrangement was a cascade of orchids and lilies that must have cost $300, at least. I felt dizzy. The sound of the party, the laughter, it all faded. All I could hear was drip, drip, drip. I found Mark in the kitchen. "The apartment looks lovely, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "That television is..." "Wow," he beamed. "I know, right? We got an amazing deal on it. Black Friday came early. Chloe's so good at finding bargains, we've been saving for it. Saving? I thought. What were you saving with? Chloe drifted over, refilling her wine glass. Oh, the TV? It's a lifesaver. My fatigue, you know. Sometimes all I can do is lie on the sofa and watch movies. It's practically a medical expense. She laughed at her own joke. I just looked at her. I thought of my $8,000, my roof, my 2 years of sewing. And the flowers, Chloe, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. They're beautiful. Aren't they? Her mother chimed in, sliding up next to her. A gift from a friend who just adores Chloe. She just has a knack for attracting generosity, don't you, sweetie? People just want to give her things. The insult was so clean, so precise, it left me speechless. My sacrifice wasn't a sacrifice. It was just generosity. I was just another one of the people who wanted to give Chloe things. I was downgraded from lifesaver to patron. I spent the rest of the dinner in a fog. I watched Chloe and her mother charm their important people. I watched Mark, so proud and oblivious, refill wine glasses that cost more per bottle than my entire weekly grocery budget. I saw Chloe showing her friends the new espresso machine. I literally cannot live without my morning latte, she said, laughing. My hand tightened on my phone in my coat pocket. While everyone was in the living room, arguing over a football game on the giant screen, I slipped back into the kitchen. I stood in the corner, blocked by the open refrigerator door. I pulled out my phone. I aimed it at the row of expensive wine bottles. Click. I angled it toward the new espresso machine, with its shiny chrome and a little cup from a brand I didn't recognize. Click. I walked back into the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt sick, but it wasn't just sickness anymore. It was cold. It was the cold, hard feeling of a bookkeeper who just found the first entry in a cooked ledger. The detective in me was born. That detective in me was wide awake for the entire drive home. I drove well under the speed limit, both hands gripping the steering wheel. My sweet potato casserole dish, now scraped clean, sat cold on the passenger seat. They had loved it. They had praised me for it, and it felt like the most profound insult of all. When I got home, I didn't even turn on the living room lights. I didn't go to my sewing room to lose myself in the patterns. I went straight to my desk in the corner. The house was cold. I could hear the drip, drip, drip from the attic, a steady, mocking rhythm. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating my face in the dark. This wasn't snooping. This was an audit. My fingers, stiff from the cold, typed in Chloe's name. Her profile popped up, a picture of her and Mark, smiling on a beach, and a little lock symbol. Private. Of course it was. People with secrets learn to lock their doors. I sat back, frustrated. I thought about the woman who'd stood by the espresso machine, telling me my son knew Chloe deserved nice things. Chloe's mother. What was her name? Linda. Or was it Laura? No, Brenda. I remembered because she'd said it with such pride. I'm Brenda, Chloe's mom. I typed her name into the search bar. Aha. Brenda Miller. A smiling photo, a little fuzzier than Chloe's. She was holding a small, yapping dog, and right next to her name, no lock. A little globe icon. Public. It was like finding a bank vault left wide open. My heart was doing a strange, slow thudding. I felt a little sick, but I clicked on her profile. People who are proud, I thought. They post pictures. I started to scroll. It was exactly what you'd expect. Blurry photos of the dog wearing a tiny sweater, links to recipes for the best cheesy chicken casserole, a political cartoon I didn't agree with. I scrolled for 5 minutes, past grainy videos of her grandkids, not Mark's, some other daughters, and my hope started to fade. Maybe the TV and the wine were just a one-time splurge. Maybe I was just being a bitter old woman. And then I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I could hear the drip, drip, drip from the attic, loud as a drum beat in the silent house. It was a new album, posted just last week. The title was Mother-Daughter Spa Day. My hand was shaking as I clicked it. The first photo was a selfie of Chloe and Brenda, beaming. They were in fluffy white spa robes, their hair wrapped in towels. They were holding up champagne flutes. Chloe's face was glowing, not with sickness, but with the kind of pampered sheen you only get from a $200 facial. Her nails were perfectly manicured, a deep, expensive-looking red. I clicked to the next photo. The two of them were sitting by an indoor pool, their feet dangling in the blue water. The caption read, "Finally relaxing. Lord knows my girl has earned it after all her stress." The next photo was of their hands, side by side on a table, showing off their new nails. I looked at the date on the post. It was from 2 days after Mark had come to my house, 2 days after my $8,000, my roof, my savings, my work had landed in their bank account. I was a quilter. I knew how to take small, meaningless scraps of fabric and stitch them together, hour after hour, until they formed a complete, undeniable picture. This was a very big scrap. I kept scrolling. The spa day was just the beginning. The week before that, an album titled Winery Tour, photos of Chloe and Brenda, and a few of those important friends from Thanksgiving, all laughing, holding up glasses of red wine at a beautiful sun-drenched vineyard. But it was the caption on the main spa day photo that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was from Brenda, gushing, "Celebrating our little windfall. Chloe's finally getting a break from all that stress. She's been so worried about those awful student loans, but it looks like things are finally turning around. Number living our best life, number blessed, number spoiled." Windfall. I stared at the word. Windfall. My roof fund. My 2 years of sewing, of battling the old machine, of aching fingers and late nights. My husband's fortress. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't help. It was a windfall. I didn't get angry. Something else happened. A cold, quiet clarity settled over me. The kind of clarity I get when I'm balancing a complicated ledger and find the one number that's been throwing everything off. As a bookkeeper, I knew you never ever leave your proof on someone else's server. My fingers moved with a new purpose. Print screen. I took a screenshot of the spa photos. I screenshotted the caption, "Celebrating our little windfall." I screenshotted the winery pictures. I carefully documented the dates, the names, the comments from friends saying, "You deserve it all." I created a new folder on my desktop. I titled it simply ROF. I saved every single image into that folder. I closed the laptop. The room was black again. The only sound was the drip, but it didn't sound like a leak anymore. It sounded like a clock, ticking. The important people at the party. The miraculous bargains. The generous friends. The gifts. It was all a script. And I had just found the footnotes. This was no longer a suspicion. This was an investigation. That ticking sound was the only thing that cut through the silence. This house, my fortress, had become so quiet in the 2 years since David passed. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the phone calls slowed down, the silence was deafening. Mark was busy, living his own life, building his future with Chloe. He'd call on Sundays, but the rest of the week it was just me. Just me and the walls that held 60 years of my life. I felt irrelevant, like a piece of furniture that was too old to be useful but too sentimental to throw away. I'd wander from room to room, I'd tidy the kitchen, then re-tidy it an hour later. I was a bookkeeper with no books to keep, a mother with no one to mother. One rainy afternoon, I was in the back of my closet, sorting through David's old clothes to take to Goodwill. I found his favorite old flannel jacket, the one he always wore to rake leaves. It smelled faintly of him, of sawdust and soap. I held it to my face and I just broke. I sat on the floor of my closet and cried. Cried for him, for the silence, for the woman I used to be. When I was done, I looked at the jacket. I couldn't give it away. It felt like giving him away. I thought about my grandmother, how she used to make quilts out of old clothes. Memory quilts, she called them. "So you can wrap yourself up in the good times," she'd say. A little spark went off in my head. I went up to the attic, stepping over boxes of old tax returns and Mark's high school yearbooks. In the far corner, under a dusty plastic sheet, was my old sewing machine. A heavy, all-metal Singer from the 1972. It had been my mother's. It was the machine I'd used to hem Mark's school pants and sew Halloween costumes. It hadn't been touched in 20 years. I lugged the 30-pound beast downstairs. It was rusty in spots. The wiring was frayed. I spent a whole afternoon taking it apart on the kitchen table, cleaning out 2 decades of dust and lint, oiling the gears until they moved smoothly. I found the old manual, and I retaught myself how to thread the needle, how to wind the bobbin. My first stitches were a disaster. The thread snapped. The tension was all wrong. The fabric bunched up. I wanted to heave the whole thing out the window, but I was a bookkeeper. I understood that you have to find the error, fix it, and try again. So I did. I stayed up until 2 a.m., just sewing straight lines on scrap fabric. Whir-clack, whir-clack. The sound was steady. It was solid. It wasn't a drip. It was the sound of making something. I took David's jacket. I found Mark's old baby blankets. I found the scraps from the curtains I'd made for our first apartment. I cut them into careful, perfect squares, and I started to sew. For a week, I just sewed. I lost track of time. I forgot to eat lunch. I just stitched these little squares of my life together. When I was done, I had a quilt. It was lumpy. The seams weren't perfectly straight, but it was beautiful. It was my whole life, warm and heavy in my lap. I felt alive. A friend from church, Mary, saw it when she stopped by. She burst into tears and asked me to make one for her with her late mother's old house dresses. She insisted on paying me. I was floored. And then, her friend called. And then, her friend's cousin. I was a bookkeeper. I knew a business when I saw one. On a terrifying impulse, I opened an Etsy shop. I took pictures of my quilt, the light in the living room making it look cozy. I called my shop the Fortress Quilt Co. I wrote a little description about memory and independence. I set my prices, figuring in every minute of my labor, every inch of thread. I hit publish, and I waited. For 3 days, nothing. Just the silence. I felt foolish. Then, one night I was sitting on the sofa, listening to the rain. My phone, on the table beside me, suddenly made a sound I'd never heard before. Cha-ching. I jumped. I thought it was a mistake. I picked it up. A notification from Etsy. You've made a sale. A woman in Oregon, a total stranger, had just paid $350 for one of my quilts. I can't even describe the feeling. It wasn't just the money. It was proof. Proof that I could still do something, that I could build something, that a stranger, hundreds of miles away, saw the value in my work. My hands, these old arthritic hands, had made something people wanted. I was independent again. Every cha-ching that followed went straight into a new savings account. The roof repair fund. Every quilt I finished and shipped was another shingle. Every late night spent hunched over that old, reliable singer was me, by myself, rebuilding my own fortress, stitch by stitch. So when I sat there, staring at the roof folder on my computer, it wasn't about the $8,000. It was about those 2 years. It was about the cha-chings. It was about the feeling of sealing that first shipping box. It was about the pride of walking to the post office. Chloe and her mother hadn't just taken my money. They hadn't just stumbled into a windfall. They had taken my work, my independence, my pride. And they had spent it on a spa day. That was the moment the bookkeeper in me knew, with absolute certainty, that this was no longer a family problem. This was a debt. And I was going to collect. Collecting a debt is work, and my work required supplies. That roof folder on my computer was a start, but it was just a collection of their extravagances. I, on the other hand, had to actually get back to work. I had 2 new orders on Etsy, a baby blanket for a woman in Ohio and a king-sized log cabin pattern for a couple in Texas. The cha-chings were starting again, but I was building from zero. The next Saturday, I was at the big strip mall out on the highway, the one with the Costco and the Old Navy. I was heading into the giant discount fabric warehouse, the kind of place where you have to dig through bins to find anything good, but the prices are right. I had a 50% off coupon clutched in my purse. I was trying to rebuild my $8,000, and I wasn't going to do it by paying full price. I parked my 5-year-old Honda. I was grabbing my purse when I saw them, Chloe and her mother, Brenda. They were walking out of a store 2 doors down, not the discount warehouse, not the shoe outlet. They were walking out of Blackwater Textiles. My blood went cold. To most people, that shop is just a name. To a quilter, it's like Tiffany's. It's not for people who sew. It's for people who hire decorators. They don't sell fabric by the yard. They sell it by the ounce. It's where you go for imported Belgian linens and hand-blocked silks. I had been inside exactly once 5 years ago just to look. I'd touched a bolt of paisley silk, saw the price tag $180 a yard, and walked right back out. And they weren't just window shopping. Brenda was carrying a big, glossy black bag with their gold script logo on it. Chloe was holding a fan of fabric swatches, tilting them in the sunlight, her head angled as she and her mother discussed them. Chloe was wearing a new, buttery soft leather jacket I'd never seen before. She was laughing, her head thrown back. She didn't look sick. She didn't look stressed. She didn't look like she could barely get off the sofa. She looked like the cover of a magazine. My hand went to my phone. It was an instinct now, as automatic as reaching for my reading glasses. I hunched down in my seat, the steering wheel digging into my chest. I zoomed in. The bag Brenda was holding was stuffed. This wasn't a yard or two for a craft project. This was a project. This was custom draperies. This was a new sofa. Drip, drip, drip. The new TV, the espresso machine, the $300 floral arrangement, the spa day, the winery, and now, Blackwater Textiles. My mind was racing. This wasn't a windfall. This was a system. This was a lifestyle funded by my 2 years of hard work, by the memory of my husband, by the leak in my roof. I drove home, my coupon still in my purse, the cheap fabric forgotten. I sat at my desk, the gray afternoon light filling the room. I opened the roof folder. I uploaded the new photo, time-stamped and clear. Chloe and Brenda, 1:32 p.m., Blackwater Textiles. It was time to test the lie. I picked up my phone and dialed Mark. I kept my voice light, breezy, the way a harmless old mother would sound. "Hey, honey, just called to see how you're doing. How's Chloe feeling? Any better?" His voice was tired. He'd been working, I was sure. "Oh, hey, Mom. Same old, you know. She's still pretty rough. This fatigue thing, it just knocks her flat. Most days she can barely get off the sofa, but her spirits are a little better, I think." I looked at the photo on my screen. Chloe, laughing in the sunlight, fanning out silk swatches. "Oh, that's such a shame," I said, my voice dripping with fake sympathy. I was just at the big fabric warehouse out on the highway, and I thought I saw her for a second, but I figured it couldn't be, not if she's so sick. Must have just been someone who looked like her. A pause. It was just a second, but it was so loud it felt like a siren. "Oh," he said, a little too quickly. "The fabric store? Yeah, that was her. I forgot to tell you. Her mom, Brenda. She's redoing her guest room, and she practically dragged Chloe along for advice. Chloe said it just about killed her mom. She was in bed for the rest of the day, totally wiped out. But you know Brenda, she's persistent." I felt the click, the clean, cold click of a puzzle piece locking into place. It wasn't just Chloe, it was Brenda. They were in it together. And my son, my smart, kind, hard-working son, was their rehearsed, unwitting spokesman. He was the one they sent to me for the money, and he was the one they fed the alibis to. "Ah, I see," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "Well, you tell her I hope she feels better." And Mark, "Yeah, Mom. You're working too hard. Don't forget to take care of yourself." I hung up the phone. I looked at the picture of the Blackwater Textiles bag. I looked at the Facebook picture, celebrating our little windfall. It was a lie. It was all a lie. Coordinated, rehearsed, a performance for an audience of one. And I was the only one who had paid for a ticket. My mind went to my old Singer sewing machine, the heavy metal workhorse. It only did one thing. It stitched, strong and straight, one line at a time. It never lied. It never pretended to be something it wasn't. I was done being the windfall. I was done being the audience. From now on, I was the bookkeeper, and the books were long overdue for an audit. An audit, I've found, always has that one final damning receipt, the one that makes the whole ugly picture come into focus. For me, that receipt wasn't a piece of paper. It was a phone call from Chloe, 2 days after I'd spotted her at Blackwater Textiles. Her voice on the phone was a complete surprise. It was soft, sweet, and hesitant. It was a voice I hadn't heard since she and Mark were first dating. "Eleanor," she'd said, like she was afraid I'd bite. I was hoping you'd let me take you to lunch. Just us girls. I feel like we haven't really connected. And I really want to thank you properly. My treat." My internal alarm, the one that had been ringing non-stop since Thanksgiving, went silent. It was replaced by a cold, quiet curiosity. "I'd like that, Chloe," I said, my voice just as sweet as hers. Where should we meet? She named The Willow, a trendy little cafe downtown that I'd only ever read about. The kind of place that serves avocado toast for $19 and lattes with foam art. I showed up exactly on time, wearing the same good blouse I'd worn for Thanksgiving. The cafe was just as I'd pictured. It was full of bright, young women in expensive-looking yoga clothes, typing on laptops. I felt old, out of place, like a discount bin cotton scrap in a box of imported silk. Chloe was already there, at a table by the window. She was wearing a simple, pale blue sweater. It looked like cashmere. She looked pale, delicate. She had makeup on, but it was performance makeup. A little smudge of dark shadow under her eyes to make her look tired. A dusting of powder to make her look wan. She was performing sickness. "Eleanor, thank you so much for coming," she said, standing to give me a frail-looking hug. The sleeve of her buttery leather jacket, the one from the fabric store, poked out from under her coat on the bench. "This is a very nice place, Chloe," I said, sitting down. "It's my one little treat," she whispered, as if sharing a secret. "Mark thinks I shouldn't, but sometimes, just sitting somewhere beautiful makes the pain a little less, you know." A waitress came. Chloe ordered a $12 wellness elixir and a tiny salad with quinoa. I ordered a black coffee. She started with the flattery. I can't stop thinking about your generosity, Eleanor. When Mark told me you gave us your roof money, I broke down and cried. I felt so guilty." I looked at her, my hands wrapped around the warm mug. I thought of the spa photos, celebrating our little windfall. I thought of the $180 a yard fabric. I thought of my son's rehearsed alibi. "You needed the help, Chloe," I said. My voice was neutral, a bookkeeper's voice. I know," she said, and she put her hand on her heart. "But that's just it. My condition. It's not like a cold. It's chronic. The doctors say this fatigue, this pain, it might be with me forever. It's the stress that makes it flare up. The stress of not knowing if we can make the payments, the stress on Mark." She leaned in, her voice dropping. This was it, the real reason for the $19 toast. "Mark, he's working so hard, Eleanor. He's taking on extra tutoring. He's coaching the debate team. He's never home. And this debt, these loans, they're not going away. It's like we're drowning, and every time we get our heads above water, another wave hits." She looked down, and I saw a tear, a single, perfect tear, roll down her powdered cheek. She wiped it away, bravely. "What I really need," she whispered, "is stability. What we need. Just a baseline. Something we can count on." She slid her hand across the cold marble table and placed it on top of mine. I looked down at her fingers. The nails were still perfect, that same deep, expensive red from the spa photos. "I was thinking," she said, her voice trembling just right. "Since you've been so successful with your quilts, you're a real businesswoman. I was thinking, if you could just invest in my health." The word hung in the air between us. "Invest?" I asked. "Just a monthly thing," she said, squeezing my hand. "A small amount. You could even set it up as a direct deposit, like you're paying a vendor. Say, $500 a month? Just to cover the interest on the loans. Just until I'm really, truly back on my feet. It would take so much pressure off Mark. He's working himself to the bone. I worry about him." I stared at her. A vendor. I was no longer his mother. I wasn't family. I was a vendor. My work, my cha-chings, my late nights with my old singer. It wasn't my independence. It was her income. The windfall was now a subscription. This was the final, most insulting link in the chain. The audacity of it. It was breathtaking. It was the boldest, coldest, most calculated business proposal I had ever heard. I looked at her perfectly manicured hand on top of my own. My hands, with the calluses on the side of my index finger from the scissors, the little white scars on my knuckles from the needle. The hands that had built a fortress, and then built a business, scrap by scrap, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was the cold, clean click of the ledger locking into place. The audit was complete. I slowly, deliberately, pulled my hand out from under hers. I smiled. It was a small, tight smile, the one I used to give auditors when I knew my books were perfect and theirs were a mess. "Let me think about it, Chloe," I said, my voice as smooth as her cashmere. "That's a very significant business decision. I'll have to review my accounts." I opened my purse. I pulled out a $5 bill and put it on the table. "For my coffee," I said. I stood up. I didn't wait for her reply. I just left her there, sitting among the $19 toast and the beautiful, blissfully ignorant young women. I walked out into the bright, cold afternoon. The entire walk to my car, I didn't feel rage. I felt purpose. The time for auditing was over. The time for collection had begun. I got in my car, and I knew exactly what my next move was. I wasn't going to call my son. I was going to go to him. I didn't go to him at home. I would not confront my son in her space. That was her territory, the stage she'd set with my money. I was going to his. I drove the 15 miles to James Monroe High School, my 5-year-old Honda rattling in a way that made me wince. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I wasn't an angry mother. I was a bookkeeper with a final report. The roof folder was open on my phone, sitting on the passenger seat. I parked in the visitor's lot, right next to the flagpole. It was 3:15 p.m. The final bell had just rung, and the building was vomiting teenagers, all noise and backpacks and restless energy. They streamed past my car, not one of them noticing the 60-year-old woman sitting frozen, staring at the front doors. They were all so young, all heading home, just like my son should be. I waited until the flood slowed to a trickle, then I got out. I walked through the big double doors, my heels clicking on the polished linoleum. The building smelled of floor wax, stale pizza, and chalk dust. I found his classroom, room 204, Mr. M. Thorne, history. The door was open. He was at his desk, but he wasn't packing up. He was just sitting there. His head was in his hands, his elbows on a stack of ungraded papers. He was rubbing his temples, a picture of pure, unfiltered exhaustion. That one image, the sight of my son, so worn down and hollowed out, it burned away any last trace of hesitation. "Mark?" His head shot up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "Mom, what are you doing here? Is everything okay? Is it the roof? Did the leak get worse?" I walked into his classroom. I looked at the posters on his wall. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I stood in front of his desk. "Yes, honey," I said, my voice quiet but hard. "The leak is much worse than I thought." He flinched. "Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'll pick up more coaching hours. I'll get you the money back." "Stop," I said. It wasn't a request. He stopped, his mouth half open. "I just had lunch with your wife," I said. His whole body relaxed in confusion. Oh, good, that's great. I'm so glad you two are." "She asked me for $500 a month," I said, cutting him off. "She wants me to set it up as a direct deposit. She called it a vendor payment to invest in her health." Mark just stared at me. He blinked. What? A vendor?" "Mom, no, that has to be a misunderstanding. She's not good with words when she's stressed. She's sick, Mom." "She was perfectly clear," I said. I pulled up one of the student chairs, the kind with the desk attached, and sat down. It was too small for me, and the discomfort kept me sharp. And I was clear, too. I told her I'd have to review my accounts. I pulled my phone from my purse. "So, I've been reviewing them for the last few weeks. Mark, I need to show you my books." I turned the phone and slid it onto his desk. The first picture was from Thanksgiving. The massive TV, the new espresso machine, the French wine. He sighed, a deep, frustrated sound. "Mom, we've been over this. It was a Black Friday deal, I told you. We saved for it." The wine was a gift from one of her mom's friends. He was reciting the lines, the script they'd fed him. I swiped to the next photo. The one of Chloe and Brenda outside Blackwater Textiles, holding the glossy bag and the fabric swatches. "This was 2 days ago," I said, my voice flat. "That's Blackwater Textiles. A single yard of their cheapest linen costs more than your monthly car payment." His face hardened. "Her mother dragged her there. She told me all about it. Brenda's redoing a room. Chloe went for an hour, just to help, and she was in bed, completely wiped out for the rest of the day. "Mom, why are you spying on her? This is bitter. This isn't you." He was cornered, so he attacked me. I expected it. I didn't raise my voice, I just looked him right in the eye. "You're right. This isn't me. I'm a bookkeeper. I'm a quilter. I'm not a spy. But you know what I am? I'm the woman who sat in my cold living room, listening to a drip, drip, drip from the attic, while I transferred my entire roof fund to you." His face softened with guilt. "Mom, I gave you that money," I said, my voice shaking just a little, "because my son, the man I raised to be honest and good, told me his wife was drowning in debt, because she was sick, because she was so stressed her hair was falling out." I leaned in, and I swiped one last time. "I gave you that money on November 10th. This is a photo Chloe's mother posted on November 12th, 2 days later. While you were here, in this room, teaching kids about history." I turned the phone to him. It was the picture from the spa. The fluffy robes, the champagne flutes held high, the perfectly manicured red nails. He just stared. He didn't speak. He just stared. The color drained from his face. I could see him trying to make it fit, trying to find the alibi. "A friend. It must have been a gift," he whispered. "Her mom probably surprised her. Read the caption, Mark." He had to lean in to see the small text. I watched his eyes move. I watched the moment his brain processed the words. He read it aloud, his voice a dead, hollow echo in the empty classroom. "Celebrating our little windfall. Blessed, spoiled, silence." The only sound was the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. He looked from the phone, to me, and back to the phone. "A windfall, Mark," I said softly. "Not a loan, not a lifesaver. A windfall." He sank back into his own teacher's chair. He wasn't angry anymore. He was gone. He put his hand over his mouth. She told me her hair was falling out," he whispered, his eyes still locked on the picture. "But her nails, they're done. They're perfect." My peacemaker instinct, the one that had cost me my roof, was screaming at me to go to him, to hug him, to say it would be okay. The bookkeeper in me held me still. "The TV," he muttered. The espresso machine. The Black Friday deal. The gifts. Oh God. "She's not sick, Mark," I said, standing up. "She's a liar. A professional one. And you and I, we're not her family. We're her windfall. We're her vendors." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and shattered. I saw the last 2 years of his life recalculating behind them. The chronic fatigue, the crippling loans, the extra shifts he'd been working. "She played you," I said, my voice firm. "And she used me to do it, and I am done." He finally broke. He dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking. "Oh my God," he sobbed into his papers. "Oh my God, Mom, what did I do?" I didn't hug him, not yet. He needed to feel this. He needed to learn this history. "The question, honey, is what are you going to do now?" I left the phone on his desk, the spa picture still glowing on the screen. "Keep it," I said. "Those are your receipts." And I walked out of the classroom, leaving him alone with the truth. I drove home from that high school, my hands steady on the wheel. The anger was gone. I felt empty, like I'd just performed a necessary painful surgery. I got home. The drip, drip, drip from the attic was still there, a steady, familiar rhythm, but it didn't bother me. It was just a problem to be solved, like any other. I made a pot of tea. I sat in my sewing corner, the room dim in the twilight. I didn't turn on the machine. I didn't pick up my needles. I just waited. The clock on the mantelpiece, the one David had given me for our 25th anniversary, ticked. 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 9 p.m. At 10:32 p.m., my phone, silent on the table beside me, lit up. It was Mark. I picked it up on the first ring. "Mark? Are you okay?" "It's done, Mom." His voice. I'd never heard it before. It wasn't the voice of my son, the history teacher. It wasn't the voice of a husband. It was the voice of a man who had just walked through a fire and come out the other side, burned but changed. All the warmth, all the exhaustion. It was gone. It was just flat, cold. What happened, honey? He told me everything. He'd driven home in a daze, my phone heavy in his jacket pocket, the spa picture burned into his mind. He'd walked into their apartment. Chloe was on the sofa, under a plush new blanket, watching the giant TV. "Hey, baby," she'd called out, not looking away from the screen. "You're late. I'm starving. Did you pick up that Thai food I wanted?" He just stood there, in the middle of the living room, still in his coat. He just looked at her. He really looked at her. He looked at the perfectly coiffed hair, the velvet pillows, the gleaming espresso machine on the counter. "How was your lunch with my mother?" he'd asked. He said she'd flinched, just a tiny, almost invisible tightening around her eyes. She'd muted the TV. "Oh, that," she'd said, her voice dripping with practiced pity. "It was fine. She's a little strange, Mark. I tried to talk to her. Ask for a little help, and she got so cold. I really don't think she likes me. I think she's just lonely." He'd said nothing. He'd just walked over to her, pulled my phone from his pocket, and held it out, open to the spa picture. "What's this, Chloe?" He said she'd laughed, a high, nervous, fluttery sound. "Oh, that! My mom, she's so embarrassing with that Facebook. She surprised me. I told her we couldn't afford it, I really did, but she insisted. It was a gift. God, I was so tired after I slept for a day." "A gift," he'd repeated. His voice was flat. "I see. And the caption? Celebrating our little windfall. Was that a gift too?" "What is this, Mark?" she'd snapped, her voice suddenly losing its frail sick girl quality. Are you interrogating me? After everything I'm going through? Your mother put you up to this, didn't she? That bitter old woman, she's trying to—" "Stop," he'd commanded. Don't you dare talk about my mother. She's the one with a bucket in her attic, because her roof is leaking." "Oh, please," she'd scoffed, swinging her legs off the sofa. "That old house? She's sitting on a gold mine. You deserved that money. You work so hard. She's just selfish." That's when he'd seen it. Her laptop, open on the coffee table, open to her email. "You're right," he'd said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I do work hard. And you're too sick to work, right? The loans, the crippling debt." She'd tried to close the laptop. "Mark, don't, that's my privacy." "You have no right." He'd picked it up. He told me it was the first time in his life he'd ever moved that fast, with that much anger. He'd just grabbed it. "Mom," he said to me on the phone, his voice hollow. It wasn't a doctor's bill on the screen. It wasn't a warning from a debt collector. "What was it?" I'd whispered. It was an email from Zillow. A confirmation. For a viewing. Tomorrow. A 2-bedroom penthouse condo. Downtown. I was speechless. A penthouse. A penthouse. He'd screamed at her. "A penthouse? On my teacher's salary? While you're too sick." And then he saw the other tab, the one she'd been looking at when he walked in. It wasn't Netflix. It was the website for the State Board of Nursing. "Mom," he said to me, and his voice broke. "Her license. It wasn't pending. It wasn't on hold. It was active. Status. Active and in good standing. It was issued 6 months ago." This was it. The final, undeniable, brutal receipt. The audit was over. He'd just stood there, holding the laptop, looking at her, and he'd said one word. 6 months. He told me she just stared at him. And then, he said, the most terrifying thing happened. She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a cold, thin smile. The sick girl was gone. The victim was gone. All that was left was the predator who had just been unmasked. "Fine," she'd said, standing up. "So what? You found out. Took you long enough." "So, all of it," he'd whispered. "The fatigue, the debt, I can't work. It was all of it." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she'd sneered. "The debt is real. But you think I was going to empty bedpans for 12 hours a day? You think I went through all that hell of nursing school to make your salary?" He told me she'd walked right up to him. She wasn't frail. She was powerful. She was buzzing with a rage I'd only seen flashes of. "You're just a high school teacher, Mark," she'd spat. "You were a stepping stone. A nice, stable, gullible stepping stone. Your mother's money? That was supposed to be our start. My start. But she's just a selfish old bitch who wants to hoard it all for herself, in that rotting old house." I looked at her, Mark told me, his voice thick. "I didn't even know who she was, and I told her." "Told her what, honey?" I told her. "That rotting old house is my home, and that selfish old bitch is my mother. And her work, the work you stole, paid for that spa day. It paid for that TV. It paid for that silk from Blackwater Textiles. You're not just a liar, Chloe," he'd said, his voice like iron. "You're a thief. Get out." She'd laughed. "What? You can't. This is my home too. We're married." "No," he'd said. "This is an apartment I pay for. With the job I go to. Get out. I'll have your things sent to your mother's. I'm done. We're done." He told me she'd tried to argue. She'd tried to cry. But he said it was like watching a bad actress on a stage. The sick act. It didn't work anymore. He'd seen behind the curtain. He'd just walked into the bedroom, packed a bag, and left her there, screaming in the living room. I'm at a motel," he said to me, his voice finally breaking. "A little place off the highway. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so stupid." "No," I said, my own tears starting to fall. "Don't you dare be sorry. You're not stupid. You're free. You come home. Just come home." I hung up the phone. I sat in my sewing corner, my old Singer machine silent in the shadows. The fortress, it had been breached, but it hadn't fallen. The leak was bad, but the foundation was still strong. The foundation was strong, but that night it felt like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting. An hour later, I saw headlights sweep across my living room wall. A car door closed. Quiet. I opened the front door before he could knock. He was just standing there on the porch, under the dim yellow light, holding a single duffel bag. It was the same one he used to take to college. He looked small. Smaller than I'd seen him since he was a boy. He was 35 years old, a grown man, a history teacher, and he looked like a lost child. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. I didn't hug him. I just stepped aside. "Come in, Mark. It's cold out." He stepped inside, into the entryway. He put his bag down on the mat where he'd stood, dripping, just a few weeks ago, asking for my roof money. He looked around, his eyes taking in the familiar, cluttered comfort of the house. He looked at my sewing corner, at the quilts folded on the shelf. He looked up at the water stain on the ceiling. It was bigger. The last rain had been hard. I didn't say anything. I just went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The whistle of it, a few minutes later, was the only sound in the house, a shrill, piercing cry in the dark. I brought 2 mugs to the kitchen table, the same table. I sat in my chair, he sat in his. He stared into the steam, his hands wrapped around the mug, but he didn't drink. She called me," he said, his voice flat. "While I was driving here. She's going to her mother's." "Okay," she said. She said I was the liar, that I broke my vows by not trusting her. I just took a sip of my tea. She said I'd be hearing from her lawyer, he added, his voice getting smaller. "Good," I said. "You'll be hearing from yours first." His head snapped up, his eyes wide. "What?" "You're going to call a lawyer. Tomorrow, first thing. You're going to freeze every joint account. You're going to change every password. This is an audit, Mark, and we are going to be thorough." He looked down. "Mom, I'm so ashamed. How could I be so stupid?" He hit the table, just once, a soft, defeated thud. "I'm a history teacher. I'm supposed to see the patterns. And I didn't want to see it." "No, you didn't," I said. "I wasn't being cruel. I was being a bookkeeper. That's not stupidity, Mark. That's hope. You're a giver. You're like your father. You see a problem, you want to fix it. You see a person who's hurting, and you want to. You want to give them your roof." I leaned forward. "People like Chloe, they're not like us. They're takers. They're not looking for a partner. They're looking for a vendor, a windfall. They don't see your hope as a virtue. They see it as an opening, a weakness to be exploited. I pointed to his mug. You can't run a life on good intentions any more than you can run a business on them. You have to. Look, you have to check the receipts. You have to do the math. The math was always there. The new TV. The spa days. The $180 a yard fabric. The numbers. They never lie, Mark. People do. He finally took a sip of his tea. It was cold. The $8,000, he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. Mom, your work, your quilts. I gave it away. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I said. I finally reached across the table and put my hand on his. And you'll pay me back. Not all at once, but you will. That's accountability. That's what's next. I stood up and took his mug. He followed me to the sink like a shadow. Your old room it's the guest room now, I said, my back to him. But I kept your old desk and your posters. The one of the solar system is still in the closet. He just stood there in the doorway. I feel like I'm 18 again. Like I failed. I'm 35 years old and I'm moving back in with my mother. I'm a cliché. I turned around, my hands still wet from the sink. No, you're a man who just found out his marriage was a business transaction. You're a man who just got out of a cult of two. You're not moving back in. You're regrouping. This house, your father and I, we built this place to be a fortress. Not just for us. For this. For when the world falls apart. You're not retreating, Mark. You're coming home. He didn't move. He just broke. He didn't make a sound, but his shoulders started to shake, and the tears he'd been holding back since that classroom, they fell, and that's when I hugged him. I wrapped my arms around my son, my tall grown-up son, and I just held him while he cried in my kitchen. I held him, and I stared over his shoulder at the dark, silent living room and at the water stain on the ceiling. It's rot, Mark, I whispered into his shoulder. It's just rot. You don't get sentimental about rot. You don't hope it gets better. You find it, you tear it out, and you rebuild with new wood. That's all this is. He finally pulled back, wiping his face on his sleeve. Now, I said, handing him a paper towel. Go to bed. You're home. Tomorrow we get the tools. And we did get the tools. The tools weren't hammers and saws. Not at first. The first tool was a phone call to a divorce lawyer. A sharp, no-nonsense woman who, when Mark explained the situation, didn't sound surprised at all. She called it economic dissipation, a fancy term for what I called theft. The days that followed were quiet. Mark lived in his old room, the one with his high school desk. He'd go to work, come home, and we'd make dinner. Sometimes we'd talk. Sometimes we wouldn't. He was a man walking through the wreckage of his own life, picking through the history he'd been taught to believe. I set up a card table in the living room for him. He'd sit there at night, surrounded by stacks of paper from his lawyer. Bank statements, credit card bills. He was finally, checking the receipts. Mom, he said one night, his voice hollow as he stared at a bill. She had a student loan. One. She paid it off. 8 months ago. How? I asked, not looking up from the quilt I was piecing. A wire transfer, from an account I've never seen, her mother's, I think. So, the crippling debt was a performance, he finished. It was all a script. She'd been licensed for 6 months. She was just pretending to be broke, pretending to be sick. So we'd pay for her life. Chloe didn't go quietly. There were furious, screaming voicemails. There were letters from her lawyer claiming emotional distress and demanding alimony. There was even a call from Brenda, Chloe's mother, who cried and told me I was a vindictive old woman who had ruined her daughter's chance at happiness. I just hung up. You don't argue with rot, you just cut it out. Mark put his head in his hands. She was a stranger. I was married to a stranger for 2 years. No, I said, the whir-clack of my old singer machine, the only sound in the room. You were a target. There's a difference. Now you know the pattern. You won't fall for it again. I kept sewing. The cha-ching from my Etsy shop started to sound like a drum beat. With Mark living with me, sharing groceries, my own expenses were low, and my story, my why, it had changed. I wasn't just a widow weaving memories, I was a businesswoman. The roof repair fund started to grow again, faster this time. And Mark, he started to heal. He stopped hiding in his room. He'd sit in the kitchen while I cooked, and he'd just talk about his students, about a book he was reading. He started to laugh again, a real, full laugh that wasn't shadowed by someone else's manufactured crisis. One day, he came home from work, and he handed me a check. It wasn't for $8,000, it was for $500. "What's this?" I asked. "The first payment," he said, his eyes clear for the first time in months. "For the roof. It's not much, but it's a start." I took it. I didn't say, "You don't have to." I didn't say, "It's fine." I was a bookkeeper. He was my son. This wasn't a gift. This was accountability. This was him, stitching his own honor back together. "Thank you, Mark," I said. "This is a good start." Spring came, and with it, a construction crew. The drip, drip, drip that had been my soundtrack of failure was finally replaced by the sound of hammers. The scrape of old rotten shingles coming off, the whine of electric saws cutting new clean wood. It was the loudest, most beautiful noise I had ever heard. It was the sound of fixing. It was a Saturday in June, 6 months after that night. I was on the front porch, a tall glass of iced tea sweating on the railing beside me. The crew had just packed up their trucks. The foreman had shaken my hand, told me I had a roof that would outlast me, and driven away. I just sat there, looking up. It was beautiful. Not a patch. A whole new roof. Dark gray architectural shingles. New white gutters. Solid. Secure. Mark's car pulled up the driveway. He got out and I saw him. He wasn't the hollowed-out man who had stood in my entryway. He'd lost that haunted look. He was lighter. He was wearing a new shirt. He was smiling. And he wasn't alone. A woman got out of the passenger side. She was wearing simple jeans and a yellow t-shirt. No cloud of expensive perfume, no buttery leather jacket. She had a friendly, open face and kind eyes. "Hey, Mom," Mark said, walking up the steps. He kissed my cheek. "The roof looks incredible." "It does, doesn't it?" I said, my heart feeling. "It's full." "Mom," he said, taking the woman's hand. "This is Sarah. She teaches English, right down the hall from me." Sarah smiled, and it was a real, genuine smile, not a performance. "It's so wonderful to meet you, Eleanor. Mark's told me so much about you, and your quilts." She glanced through the window at my sewing corner. "They're absolutely breathtaking. They're art." She didn't ask for anything. She didn't flatter. She just appreciated. Mark put his arm around my shoulders. We both stood there, the three of us, looking up at the new roof, gleaming in the afternoon sun. "It looks great, Mom," he said again, his voice quiet. I leaned my head on his shoulder. The fortress was secure. "Yes," I said. "It feels safe."